Hi, I'm Julie Cooper, a mystery and thriller writer, and half of the duo bringing you the podcast, Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. We have a special guest today, and he's a writer of thrillers, a bestseller, and I'll let Wendy introduce him in a moment. But first, just a quick thanks to my brother Chris Squires for his original composition and performance of our theme song, The Man in the Panama Hat. Over to you, Wendy.
Hi, everyone. I am cozy mystery crazy, but I enjoy all mysteries. And today I'm wondering, why do authors torture their characters? Writers put them through what we would never want to be put through. Is it to see how they react and if they can survive it? Oh, and it should go without saying that this is about psychological torture as well, or at least as much as physical torture. Is it the raw emotion that only hurting your character creates? Is that what it takes to grip readers from the heart? Or is it action that we want, and the unavoidable result is pain? Do we need to witness the pain in order to understand the characters, to see them grow? I think the saying may be, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But actually, I hate that saying. Is it the suffering that they go through, revealing what uniquely hurts them? Is that what makes the character become real in the reader's mind? Well, I think our guest today does a tremendous job torturing his characters. Today's guest is Glen Erik Hamilton, who grew up aboard a sailboat and I hear spent his youth finding trouble around the marinas and commercial docks and the islands of the Pacific Northwest. This exciting author received so many awards from his first book, Past Crimes. He was going to need a bigger boat if he hadn't moved to Burbank, California, where he now lives with his family. His many awards include Macavity Awards Best First Book winner, Best First Novel Strand Critics Award winner, Nero Award nominee, Anthony Awards Best First Novel winner, Barry Awards Best First Novel nominee, and Edgar Awards Best First Book nominee. He visits his Seattle hometown frequently to soak up some rain. I was fortunate to meet him there between rain showers at a fundraiser for the King County Library System. His thriller Van Shaw mystery series starts with Past Crimes. The second book, Hard Cold Winter, is available in paperback in May. And the third, Every Day Above Ground, is available July 25th. Welcome, Glen Erik Hamilton.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you. You know, I think after that intro, I'm going to have new business cards printed that say Glen Erik Hamilton, expert torturer. and we'll just see what sort of internet searches I show up on after
there
that,
you go,
along the way.
Well, I've got some questions for you, Glen, so I hope you're ready.
Yes, let's launch on in.
Okay. Some thriller writers, not you, but some, are criticized because their protagonists, especially those in the action-adventure mode, are too slick, too one-dimensional, and almost formulaic. And I suppose there's a market for that with some readers. But your lead character, Van Shaw, is in many ways, certainly we can say, a damaged human being, one who's vulnerable because of his upbringing, one who's a veteran dealing with some emerging PTSD issues, and basically a man of action who has both regrets and compassion. So I'm wondering, was it hard to write about him, and did you worry about making him too emotionally resonant for a thriller protagonist?
Well, as far as being hard to write about him, I think there's always a tendency, if you like your protagonist, if you believe in them, there's often a tendency for writers to try to make it easy on your protagonist, to try to give them a happy home, a happy life, you know, some measure of comfort. And as a thriller writer, you have to work against that, of course. As you said in your intro, we want to see these characters, as grueling as it is, go through something of a gauntlet, right? They have to endure and survive and come out changed, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. but that is the adventure that we're driving these on. Adventure is about the change of the characters. And so we really have to fight that tendency to try to give our protagonists easy lives and good lives, which is not to say that that we're writing without hope or that it's some sort of black comedy. But I do think it can be tough sometimes because we empathize with these characters so much. The good news is that if we truly do believe in our protagonist, if we like them, if we're writing about them, then, and if the readers feel the same way, then the emotional scenes can be just as exciting as the action scenes. And that's true of not just thrillers, but we see it in nighttime soaps and in romantic comedies, successful ones. And if you really enjoy the people you're spending time with, then suddenly the scenes with emotional conflict are just as enthralling as the scenes where somebody's pointing a gun at somebody else.
Very good point. And certainly if you're writing a series, I would hope most writers want to and should like their main protagonist. So
maybe I do think there's definitely the anti-hero, and we can have those too. But I think even anti-heroes, usually the creators and the readers have a bit of love for them too.
Right. They're the person you sort of love to hate, I guess. But Bob Dugoni, when asked about creating characters, and he talks about this often in writing workshops, often says that our protagonists are of the writer, but are not the writer. So my question is there anything from your personal life that you'd care to share with us that you've brought forward into writing about your characters, especially the empathetic Van Shaw?
Well, Van and I have totally different backgrounds. There's no doubt. I was not raised by criminals.
Right.
My parents are very good people, hardworking.
As right.
Came from a two. Both parents worked. They worked hard to give me a good and well-grounded moral upbringing, which I love and appreciate them for, certainly. Van, in addition, went into the military, and I'm not an Army veteran like he is. I have friends who are, and they fact check me both in terms of the military expertise and knowledge, but also in terms of the attitude. One of the things I check with them is this voice right? Is this how a recent Army veteran and Ranger would consider the situation? And I like to double check that.
Right. Very good.
Besides all that, though, a lot of Van is me, and a lot of me is Van. Although we have different backgrounds, we've wound up mentally in much the same place, largely because he's the first main character I've created. That's part of it. So naturally, I steal a lot from myself for that, but also just because it gives more resonance to it. I think when I'm saying things through Van, a lot of those things are my own points of view, or the same ways that I tend to think about situations. And that includes his sort of libertarian attitude to things and to people, the live and let live attitude, but also the grounding that you have to have a moral center, and that ethics are largely situational, but that there are lines that you will not and cannot cross if you want to look yourself in the mirror.
Right. Okay. Makes perfect sense. And Van Shaw, for those of our readers and listeners who haven't yet read your books, is the grandson of a professional thief, the man who raised him. So we can say Van's moral compass is decidedly tilted as a result, even though he's found structure and some more conventional values by going into the Army and becoming a Ranger. What else do you think makes him so interesting for your readers?
Well, there's definitely that push-pull of, he was raised with one attitude towards the law and morality, and then the Rangers brought him through a 180, where if you've ever read the Rangers' credo and the standards that they are held up to, those are very high standards, even for as strict an environment as the Army. They're at least a notch or 2 or 10 above along the way. There isn't really it's a very uncompromising set on what they can and cannot do. And Van had made himself a home there. And if there's an overarching theme to the books, it's especially in the first ones. It's Van getting comfortable with the gray areas in between. He's seen both sides. Neither one was an entirely great fit for him, and now he's figuring out where to go from that. The other recurring theme is probably family. There was the one he was born to. He lost his mother very early. He never knew his father, and he was raised by his grandfather, who was an unusual individual, to say the least.
To put it mild.
He has friends.
Yeah.
Yes, he has friends that he's chosen, and in some ways abandoned them when he escaped into the army. And then he has the family of the brotherhood that of his fellow Rangers, which is a big part of the second book, Hard Cold Winter, and the family that he created there. And so Van is a man kind of in search of that group around him. He's not the lone hero of say the Reacher series, which I love, and other books similarly, which have sort of lone wolf protagonists. On the surface, you might think Van is that person, but when you dig a little deeper, you realize that no, he's surrounding himself with people he loves. They're just unusual and a little off kilter, right?
Right. Good. So he's building a family of his own choosing.
He is, without necessarily even knowing it. Part of the fun I have in the books is how much does Van really realize what he's doing here, right? So that's, very slowly, and how much do it's subconsciously, I'm sure I do it too. How much do I realize how much I'm writing about? And then I realize, oh no, he's kind of built this family unit without really intending to necessarily.
Fascinating. And I think that gives it a lot of resonance for your readers. Now, I always ask our interview subjects about writing books. Is there a special writing book that you'd recommend to our listeners as something that's truly helpful in writing thrillers specifically?
Sure. Oh, for thrillers specifically. Well,
or just in general, because our readers and listeners enjoy a wide variety of books. So,
right. The thriller. It's funny. Thriller as a genre is fairly recent in terms of being defined as a different thing from mysteries, right? ITW, International Thriller Writers, is only about 12 years old, right? And so that was a group that said, hey, this is different than the mysteries that are celebrated at BoucherCon and at the Malice Domestic and many other conventions that have been running for a long time.
Absolutely.
Let's celebrate thrillers on their own, which is a wonderful thing. There's room for everybody. And I like reading across the gamut of different mysteries. But there aren't a lot of books that I've seen, at least not yet, I haven't done a lot of homework on it, that are specifically about thriller writing. But I think a lot of the lessons in mystery writing are pertain to thrillers quite a bit, right? About what you reveal and how much you reveal and the richness of the different layers of characters that you have to have. You have characters that will come in for a scene and then be gone. You have characters that will repeat throughout the book, and you have characters that will repeat throughout the series, and each of those has to be given different attention. So,
right,
there's the great standard books, and I'm sure they've been mentioned here on the podcast before, like Bird by Bird, of course, is a wonderful one, and Lamott's book. Living the Literary Life, if I'm remembering the title, or Building a Literary Life by Carolyn C. is a thick read, but one that I really like. But specifically for mysteries, my favorite are the books that Lawrence Block wrote that were largely put together out of the famous columns that he wrote for a long time for Writer's Digest. Lawrence Block being the famous mystery writer who's created Matthew Scudder, he's created Bernie Rodenbar, others. And he wrote, there's one called Telling Lies for Fun and Profit.
I've got that on my shelf,
Yeah. There's one called Spiders Spin Me a Web. And they are funny. They're short because they originally had life as articles. And they're very to the point about what works and doesn't work, at least for him, in writing. And what he writes primarily is mystery and crime. And so you can take those as lessons from a grand master who's written many series and many points of view over many decades about what works and what does not.
Great recommendations for our listeners. And as a writer that's once again querying agents, please tell us about the sentence from your website that says, "I've never written a query letter." and especially why aspiring writers shouldn't now be putting your photo on their dartboards.
That sentence is almost trolling, isn't it? It's designed to get a reaction. Yeah. If it's a thriller, that's the hook right there. It's like, you've never written a query letter, you jerk. But yeah, I wrote that as the lead in to an article for The Thrill Begins, which is the online magazine out of ITW, specifically for folks who have broken into thriller writing and traditional publishing for the most part. And I led off with that both to be funny, but also because it's a lot of these stories have the same resonance. People work hard, they reach out, they find an agent, they find a publisher, and they get published. My track was a little different, and the biggest hook of it is that I jumped a step, and it was a hard step.
Yes, it was a big step.
It's a big step. When we moved to, and I'll give the short version of the story. For those interested in the longer version of the story, they can look up The Thrill Begins and my name and find it there. But when we moved to California, I had a chance to take some time off, and I went to the library because it was hot. It was summer in the valley. It's no time to be outside. Went to the library and tried writing to see if I liked it. I did. Realized, I think wisely, that I needed classes and I needed writing groups in order to get better at it, and started in that. And eventually started forming, getting the idea that, I think I'd really like to write a book, just to see if I could write the book, with no real dreams of publishing it at that point. It was just to see, can I write a book? Can I do it? With the day job and family and the rest of the things. So eventually I joined a group that was specifically for mystery writing, and that was kind of where things got into second, if not third gear. And the book that developed over the next 3.5 years was Past Crimes, out of working with that. And I called that grad school kind of 10 pages at a time, because every week we'd bring in 10 pages, workshop them, talk about them, and then you'd either bring in a rewrite or the next 10 pages, right? And so very slowly you're learning, from from the expert teacher, Geraldine Farmer, who's a well renowned mystery writer in her own right, as well as a superb teacher, and folks like me in the class who are very serious about learning and trying to get better as you go. And so after that amount of time, I told you I was going to give the short version of the story. It's turned into the long version of the story. After that amount of time, I learned about Thriller Fest, which is ITW's annual conference in New York. And one of the reasons that they've settled it in New York and they don't move around like other mystery conventions is because of the ties. If they hold it in New York, they've got immediate ties to the publishing industry and the literary agencies that are there. And so that allows them to have one afternoon dedicated to what they call Pitch Fest, which is essentially speed dating with agents, where you get on your comfortable shoes and you stand in line, and they let you in at a particular time, and all the agents, and there's usually 40 or so agents and publishing houses there, and you. If you've been smart, you've ranked the agents you want to see in order of their likely interest in your book and what you're promoting, and you pitch your idea to them, and they'll talk to you from 2 to 5 minutes, depending upon how many questions they have and how interested they are. And at the end of that, they'll say, okay, no, thank you, or send me 50 pages, or send me 100 pages, or send me the whole manuscript, depending upon their preference. And then you email that to them later, right? Right. You don't have to bring stacks of manuscripts. So they don't want to take them, and you don't want to bring them. So it's
they don't
that's
want the
wonderful
paper. Yes.
Right. Exactly. The wonderful part about the electronic age. So I decided to do Pitch Fest just to get some practice at querying before, and to understand if there might be a market for this manuscript I'd mostly produced at that point. And as it turned out, there was. I got a lot of interest in it. I got a couple of offers of I sent out a lot of the manuscript afterwards as soon as I had gone home and very quickly done a polish run on it. I sent that out with it because the interest surprised me, to be perfectly honest. And the number of people who wanted the entire manuscript surprised me. And I wasn't quite done doing the last polish run. So I went home and worked like a maniac for 2 weeks to finish it and then sent it out afterwards. And that turned into, some of them decided to pass. I got a couple of offers of representation, and the agent I went with has been extraordinary. She's outstanding. In addition to having many high-profile clients, even more than that, she's a wonderful guide to the world of publishing, and I really couldn't have done better in finding somebody. So we waited until she had very little suggestions for the manuscript. We knew suggestions would come back from whatever publishing house might be interested. We waited until the publishing world came back from vacation, because in some ways the publishing world is still in the 1950s and everybody leaves New York in August.
Yes.
So they all go on
So I've
vacation.
heard.
Nobody's there, right? And so we waited until September, and she sent the manuscript out, and we had a couple nibbles and an offer from William Morrow, an imprint of HarperCollins, within about 2 months. So it moved very, very quickly.
It sure did.
Yeah. And so that's how I skipped the important and nerve-wracking query letter stage. But there was a lot of work that went into preparing for that. There was years of effort in trying to write the best book I could write. And honestly is separating your ego from the work enough to say, yes, this needs work, right? Or this can be adjusted. And if I have one strong talent, I think, as a writer, it's the ability to go, works, doesn't work, get rid of it, right? And it, if it's great, fantastic. Maybe it'll turn up in another book later. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And you just have to kind of go, okay, next thing.
Right. Sort of that sense of ruthlessness about killing your darlings if they don't work. So Absolutely. And that's really, really tough. But I also think it's something you get better at with practice. You have to trust that good stuff will surface in another form later if it needs to surface. Yes, indeed. And I know you've talked a little bit about ITW. I'm a member of the International Thriller Writers Organization and Thriller Fest. For writers who are thinking about attending and have never participated, any tips or suggestions?
Yeah, if you're going for Pitch Fest, of course, there's plenty of homework you can do ahead of time to look into the agents and the backgrounds that they give and make sure that you are prepared. And if you rank your agents, you will certainly get to talk to at least the top half dozen of them along the way. So it was certainly worth it for me. Besides that, though, besides Pitch Fest, the first 2 days of the conference are Craft Fest, which is really for the writers, and you can get some superb instruction in fairly small settings, maybe 30 or 40 people in the audience, of talking about the craft of writing from a variety of perspectives. And there's different tracks you can go to. The advantage of going multiple years is that sometimes they repeat classes and you can hit ones that you didn't get to the last year.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then the second 2 days are Thriller Fest proper, and that's as much for the fans as it is for writers, where folks can come and see keynote speakers and meet authors and get books signed and enjoy the cocktail parties, because there seem to be about 3 every day. And so really,
Great.
you've got to pace yourself at these things. You really, really do.
I see. Okay.
My wife came with me for my debut year in 2015. And that was the advice I gave her, is like, do not use all of your drink tickets, because you will not feel good the next day. You really won't.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
And I know going to Thriller Fest is a considerable investment. I mean, especially for us from the West Coast, flying there, the hotels, the cost of the programs. Yeah, it's a big step.
Yeah, it's a big step, and it is a considerable investment. One of the reasons it is a larger investment is that ITW doesn't charge dues. unlike other organizations. So it's important to point out that they sort of split the difference there a little bit. But yes, if you're traveling to Midtown Manhattan in July, it carries an expense with it. I've certainly found it worth it. Not least because some of my best friends in the writing community have come from attending Thriller Fest and having a great time there. But from a networking standpoint, it can be a really strong place to go. And for those of us who can be more introverted, that's the time to, dust off your extrovert persona and try to put that on and get out there and meet some folks, because you will be astounded by how friendly the people are there. Everywhere from the very famous writers to the folks starting out just like you. It's a very welcoming community. I was really amazed and pleased by how warm everyone was. It's not a zero-sum game. Just because somebody else succeeds does not mean that you fail, and vice versa. And I think there's a realization of that in our community. Readers want to read, and they will read as many books as they can.
Oh, it sounds terrific. I'm really hoping to attend next summer, not this July, but it sounds like a great event. And we'd love to have you do a reading from one of your books for our listeners, if you'd be willing to do that for us.
Sure, absolutely. 1 second. Drink of water before we begin. So,
okay.
One of the things I like doing in the books is I have what I call interstitial chapters, which are in between the main action. Hopefully they don't interrupt the main action too much, but they are flashbacks to Van's life when he was younger, before he left Seattle. In the first book, Past Crimes, we see him at various ages being raised by his grandfather, and it gets us a chance to know characters. I'm not revealing too much in this. It's on the flyleaf of the book. But when he returns to Seattle at the very start of Past Crimes, he finds his grandfather shot. So the two of them don't have much interaction in the book proper. So in order to explore that relationship, we have these chapters showing Van at different ages. We see him at age 9, 10, 11, 14, so forth, and how the relationship changed over time, but also how he grew up. Really is to give the notion of him. And I think it gives not only a chance to meet other characters, but also a richer understanding of who Van is. And I enjoyed doing that so much that it's a structure I've continued in the following two books. In Hard Cold Winter, I focus mostly on Van when he's 16 and especially 17 and the events of one particular summer. In Every Day Above Ground, which is the new one coming out in July, I'll leave that for readers to discover at what age we're looking at Van at that point. But it's a lot of fun. They're a little bit like exciting short stories, but they also have resonance in what's happening today. And so that's something that I think I'll continue to do with Van, just because I think it gives. I have a lot of fun with it. Readers have told me they have a lot of fun with it. And I think overall it gives more emotional resonance to what's going on.
Right. And it sounds like in terms of pacing that it sort of moves the story along and gives it more depth. So
I hope so, certainly. So what I wanted to read today is from the first interstitial chapter in Hard Cold Winter. Van is 16 years old. He is at a rival high school's football game where they're playing Van's high school. He's gone there with friends, kind of to cheer on the team, but mostly he's bodyguarding one of the friends who's gotten himself into a little trouble. That's not really the point. But he finds himself at Garfield High School, which is a real high school in Seattle, and he's their team is getting trounced. The Paladins, Van's team, is getting trounced. He's kind of bored by the game, so he's looking out, and we're going to meet one of the main characters of the book, but we're going to meet her at age 14. We're going to meet these characters when they're teenagers. So the Paladins fumbled the ball before they could get it to Davy. To look at something else, I scanned the crowd for girls. I spotted one worth looking at, off our side of the bleachers by the concession stand. Dark hair in mini braids, very long limbs in purple leggings and a white tank top. She was sitting up on the wheelchair ramp railing, legs tangled around the pipes, shoulders back like she was posing for an invisible photographer. Then she turned around. I laughed, mostly at myself. Alana Call, Big Will Willard's niece. What was Alana doing here? She was 14, barely, too young to go to Garfield. With her height, she could pass. Maybe she was dating a guy who went here. I usually saw Alana with a flock of tween girls like Lucille Boylan and Tammy Fights trailing after her. I watched her. She kept her eyes on the concession stand. The long lines of customers from halftime had dwindled to a trickle of people, and only one skinny kid was left in the stand to take orders. He took the money from each customer and made change out of a little steel lockbox. Cash only, just like the games at Watson. Boys tossed furtive glances at Alana as they walked past. Some made sure to walk past more than once. Her eyes stayed on the skinny kid. And the money. "Hang here," I said to Rob. "I'll be back." "Hustle up. No way I want to sit to the end of this horror movie," Rob said. "Which one is she?" Louise teased. Alana was so focused on the concession stand that I was sitting on the railing next to her before she turned. She had painted dark black eyeliner all around her green eyes, and her lips shone under a thick layer of caramel-colored gloss. "Oh, hey," she said, recognition hitting her. "You're Van." "I didn't know you were into mathletes," I said, nodding toward the geeky counterboy. "Huh?" "You've been staring at him for like half an hour." She looked back and forth between the kid and me. "What, are you stalking me?" I grinned. "It's a really dumb idea. The cash box, I mean." Alana stiffened and hunched her shoulders. "I don't know what you mean, or care." "Okay." I watched the game. She held out for one more Garfield first down. "Why is it a bad idea?" she asked. "I got to guess at a couple of things," I said. "At the end of the third quarter, Computer Camper there will stop selling soda and popcorn and lock everything up, just like at football games at Watson. Maybe you've already got a way to get into the stand, but he'll probably lock the box in a cabinet inside the stand, too. Maybe that's not a problem. Maybe I can pick locks." "Fine. You think I'm lying?" "Like you said, I don't care. So it takes an extra minute or 5 for you to open the cabinet and the box. Meanwhile, that cop watching the crowd will probably come down here to keep an eye on people leaving the game." She glanced up at the bleachers. She'd known right where the cop was without looking around for him, which was one point in her favor. "Well, maybe he comes down," she said. "Maybe not." "Where are you going to hide the cash?" I said. "It's all small bills. You got no pockets, unless you're wearing a much bigger bra than you need." She flinched. "You're an asshole." But I'm not wrong. I watched the game and the cop for another minute. He hadn't looked our way. Didn't mean he hadn't noticed Alana hanging around. "Do you think you could open the cabinet?" she said. I was sure I could steal the cop's police cruiser and disable its transponder before he noticed it was gone, but this wasn't a game of you show me yours. "I think it's too much risk for $300 or $400, I said. "Would you do it?" said Alana. She slid off the railing to stand almost in front of me, a little slantwise, head tilted just so. Another pose for the unseen photographer. "It would really help me out." "No." "Please?" she said. She moved close, touching my thigh with hers, close enough for me to smell floral soap and hairspray. She tossed her head back and gave me a big, green-eyed invitation. "Try that on the kid at the counter," I said. "He'll probably hand over the box without even knowing it." Garfield must have scored again because the crowd in the bleachers behind us suddenly roared. Alana flinched. When the noise died down, she pouted at me and folded her arms. "Jack off," she said, without any heat to it. "I need the money." "We all need the money," I said. "That's why they put it in steel boxes with cops around." "You go to Watson, right?" "Yeah." "I'll be at Roosevelt next year." "Too bad." The enticing look was back. "Would have been cool to see you." I was saying a silent thanks that Alana Call wouldn't be lurking around during my senior year when she stepped in and kissed me hard on the mouth. I didn't immediately kiss back. I didn't move away. She broke it off an instant before I decided. "See you," she said, smirking. She took off at a fast walk out of the exit. The candy smell of her lip gloss lingered. When I got back to where the Firmino brothers were sitting, Luis was grinning so wide that the corners of his mouth almost touched his pointy sideburns. "Ooh, Vanny," he said. "I don't know her, do I?" said Rob, frowning at the gate where Alana had left the stadium. "She's hot." "She's like 14, I said. Luis waved a hand, weary of the world and everyone in it. "If there's grass on the field, then you play, fool." "Flag," laughed Rob. 10 yards at least." I shook my head. Alana Call had definitely scored some points off me. I just wasn't sure how.
That is awesome.
So good.
Thank you
So like I said,
much.
it's a lot of fun writing Van at different ages when he's, younger and cocky about some things and confused by other things.
Right, right.
I think you really
So
captures
good.
that age so well. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I've got a few questions for you myself, so I'm going to just dive right in. A character's suffering is often more interesting for readers when it comes from remorse. Remorse is such a strong emotion and a complicated one to show. How do you reveal remorse in your characters, like Van in Past Crimes?
Yeah, regret is certainly a big part of not only my book certainly, but a big part of noir in general, right? Regrets for the past or things that have gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you show it by what characters start to think about and then stop, and then the actions that they take immediately following, or what they tend to do instead of, how they reroute their emotions or their thoughts towards that. Certainly Van has a lot of remorse for how things ended between him and Dono, as well as sort of abandoning his friends to flee town when he was 18. Dono has a lot of remorse, certainly, and a lot of melancholy in his character. For Van's mother basically was kicked out / left the house when she was pregnant with Van at age about 16. Dono has a lot of remorse from that. Additionally, Van's mother, Dono's daughter, died only a few years after that, when Van was about 6, and then he came to live with Dono. So there's a lot of regret in their history, and not to reveal too much of the plot, but part of what Van is discovering is what Dono has done since he's been gone, whether he's really cut Van out of his heart, or whether he's taking steps to try to mend fences, which is the reason that Van has come back to town.
Interesting. The I noticed that the trials and tribulations that one character might just shrug off, those same trials and tribulations could break another character. As an author, finding the optimal open wounds to pour vinegar on seems to me to be an art. Do you design your protagonist around weaknesses that you have in mind? Or do the characters develop flaws and weaknesses as you write?
So some of it comes out in the writing, but a lot of it, I think most of it really, if you've done your homework in thinking about who the character is and what they care about, you also know how to hurt them, right? Mm-hmm. And if there's a rule for emotional resonance in characters, is you got to go towards the pain. You got to lean into that a little bit, and give the character a moral code that they have to break. Give them something they care about that's endangered or lost. Those are the things that make us sympathize with characters and care how it comes out, rather than just the same old of everyday life, right? We're writing heightened reality here, and it's important to go towards the things that sting the most and put salt on those wounds.
Glenn, it's so interesting that you say that, because I'm a cozy writer, and as a cozy writer, I want things to be kind of cozy and perky and happy and everything, and that is one of the things I really struggle with, because even in cozies and other mysteries, it's just like you say, it has to have that conflict, that suffering. Some of that has to be there, but it is, as a writer, I have to force myself to go that direction. It's tough.
Yes. And I think, I give all credit to cozy writers. I enjoy reading cozies from time to time. Cozies are tough, because especially in this day and age, because what we talk about in real life is not what characters often talk about in cozies anymore. And so real life is a little harsher. So cozy writers often have to walk that line of figuring out how much to reveal, rather than just really going straight for the gut, as maybe a modern noir might be able to do.
Yeah. Well, your first person point of view really puts me in the protagonist's perspective, pulling me out of my own mind and emotions. Are there challenges that you struggle with writing in this point of view, and why did you choose it?
I chose it because it's certainly most immediate. I think also largely because it was a first book, and it was intended to be a series character before very long, before I was too far into it. That it gives an immediacy writing in the first person. You know what the lead character knows. You can be in their head. You can really understand why they figure things out and how they figure things out and what they feel, without necessarily having. And Van is only an unreliable narrator in the sense that he doesn't always know his own mind completely. Beyond that, he's completely honest with the reader about what he knows and is trying to do and is intending to do. So that's a little easier, I think, especially for a writer starting out to write in first person. But it also gives a greater immediacy to danger, to action scenes, to things like that. It limits you in terms of scope. And in my fourth book, which I'm working on now, I'm playing with that a little bit. But I like first person a lot just because it's something that draws the reader in quickly and effectively, and it's a lot of fun.
It really does draw the reader in. Boy, I could tell you, especially in your books. And now I'm excited to hear that you're working on a fourth book. That's exciting for readers.
I am. Yeah, it's in the early stages yet, but it's actually the fourth book will probably be a standalone mystery. So stepping away from Van for at least one book.
Okay.
I do have an idea for the next Van book, however, so I'm excited about that too. But I wanted to branch out a little bit and write a character with a different background and a different history, and write a standalone thriller. So I'm in the working on the opening chapters of that now, getting it to a place where the publisher gives it the nod.
Oh, great. Okay. I've got that in mind now. Well, at the beginning of Past Crimes, Van's returning home, as we've said. This is after 10 years, and now he's a man. He's become a different person than when he left. And when he arrives home, he's suddenly in the midst of break-ins, thefts, attempted murder. More crimes are suspected. He's being chased by the police, and he's being threatened by others. In all this action, he has to draw on skills that he learned from his grandfather, skills that he thought he'd left in his past. So can you tell us just a little bit more about writing this relationship between Van and his grandfather, and how much fun it is for you to write those flashback chapters at different ages that Van is?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's huge fun. Both because it gives me a chance to take a different angle on things than the main action, right? So we can have a large action scene, and then it's a chance for both the reader and me sometimes to take a breather, but also look at the characters and learn a little bit more about them, and hopefully make them richer as a part of it. With Van and Dono, his grandfather, they share the same name. They're both named Donovan. Van was named for his grandfather, and as is the Irish way, the Donovan got shortened to Dono, and Van, of course, the younger, became Van. And so they are named. Van is his grandfather's namesake, and they share maybe more things than is healthy in their attitude. The same sort of ruthlessness and attention to detail and individuality that makes Dono who he is also why, as Van grew to manhood, the two of them could no longer share a house. It just wasn't going to work out because Van was becoming very much like Dono, and you can't have two tigers in the same territory.
Yeah.
And so also I made Dono Van's grandfather because I wanted there to be some generational remove between them. We know our parents usually pretty darn well, but grandparents, especially if they weren't there or they were there infrequently, are a little more of a mystery, right? They're removed by time. They grew up in a different era, and in Dono's case, a different country. he would have grown up during the Troubles in Belfast, where he's from, and got out of that and came to America to make his own way. So there's a generational remove of time, but there's also a generational remove of attitude too. Van is a much more modern person than his grandfather is.
Yeah.
And so, so that allows for a greater difference and less understanding between them as adults than we might normally get.
Interesting.
And I should note that since Dono had his daughter young, and Van was born very young, although Dono's his grandfather, there's only about 36 years between them. And so Dono is still very much a young, vibrant person when he's suddenly saddled with this 6-year-old. He's only in his 40s.
It was interesting too to me that the daughter and Van's mother, so you don't hear that much about her in the book, but just little indications like that one, that she named her son after her father. That sort of stuck with me too, even though it wasn't really brought out that much. But it's interesting that they both have the same name, that she did that.
Yeah, and that's it kind of speaks to the challenges that the families had, but also the love that still exists between the generations. We'll be learning more about Van's mother and his father in later books.
Great.
Oh, good.
Great. Okay, I'm just curious. As a kid, were you a reader, and what were a couple of your favorites when back then when you were a kid?
Oh yeah. Well, when I was really young, there were the Encyclopedia Brown books, of course. Loved those. And his bodyguard, Sally, I think her name was. So, so he had a kick-ass woman next to him to defend him against Bugs Meany.
Nice.
You got to think that, if the kid's name is Bugs Meany, how can he not be a bully? That's just
Right.
it's really stacked against him, So the Encyclopedia Brown books I loved. I love the Three Investigators books, which aren't maybe as widely known, but they were a group of kids who had their own clubhouse that they had made out of a trailer in a junkyard and a secret entrance and all that. And they had latched Alfred Hitchcock's name onto the books. Alfred Hitchcock presents the Three Investigators, but they were really for grade school and middle grade kids and the mysteries that these young children would get into. But the notion of having your own clubhouse was pretty awesome. I loved that. And I liked a series, again, that may not be as well known, called The Great Brain, which was a family growing up in Utah around the turn of the 20th century, maybe a little after, around 1910 or so. But the middle child was known as the Great Brain because he was a schemer and a swindler. And so they're books for kids, but if you're talking about a protagonist that works outside the law, he ran pretty close to that. So on the way, so it was sort of a Huck Finn type character.
Oh,
so
great!
Those were when I was really young, and then when I got older, got into Ian Fleming. I got into John D. MacDonald, whose character also lived aboard a boat, so he was almost required reading. The Travis McGee books are definitely a big influence on Van. And then later on, about the time I was in high school, discovered Robert B. Parker and the Spencer novels, which were really taking off then. And there was a backlog of those. So in addition to Agatha Christie and many of the classics, I would say Spencer was probably the biggest influence at that age.
I love those. Oh, fantastic. Well, another powerful emotion in your books, besides remorse, is betrayal. What are the traits that you write into characters to hint at their capability for betraying others?
I think everybody is capable of betraying others. Everywhere from small lies to cover up things we'd rather not talk about, to a complete turnaround depending upon what's at risk. Right?
Yeah.
Van certainly has friends in the criminal community and people who will go out of their way to help him. It doesn't mean that they will won't give him up if they have to, if something else is at greater risk. You know, if it's a choice between Van going to jail and say their son going to jail, Van's probably going to get on the short end of that stick, right?
Yeah.
So everybody has their own points of view and their own motivations, and I not all of these characters can be trusted in the same way that we would imagine having total trust for somebody. So I think everybody is capable of a little betrayal. If as far as traits to write into characters to show that they might be thinking about that, you look at the indirect answers that they give to questions. You look at the actions that they take in and around a character. Sometimes those are red herrings, and sometimes they're indications that something's going very wrong in the relationship.
I love red herrings. I jump at red herrings all the time. Darn it.
Me too. I'm terrible at figuring out mysteries when I read them. I'm just awful at it. I don't even try. I just enjoy the story.
You've blogged a little about surprises you learned about publishing and writing a series. Do you have any more advice for thriller writers about writing and publishing? Yeah.
I would encourage. I do have an infrequently kept blog, but one of the more recent entries I made was about lessons from being in the first year or year and a half in the publishing machine of genre writing in particular, where you're trying to produce a book about once a year, and that is a fairly set schedule that there can be surprises in. Not only the work of producing the book, but the work of promoting the book, getting it out there, publishing it, going through various rewrites, going through various editing rounds. I think it behooves all writers, especially genre writers who are sort of looking to produce a lot of content as fast as they can, to understand that schedule up front and plan accordingly. Right.
Right.
For example, I will try never to have a new hardback or new book coming out at the same time as as the manuscript for the next one is due, because that hit me once, and that was a very tough time, just because there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done in a short amount of time. So, those are good lessons. Also, if you're thinking series writing, it's good to think ahead and try to have an arc planned that you can talk to your agent and your publisher about and really plan for the future. Just because I think it will make proposals easier for you, which are as difficult as query letters, if not more so. And you'll be able to work with your publisher sort of long-term on where the series is going.
Wow, that's really good advice. I never thought about that.
Very helpful.
Yeah. So, hey, Julie.
I should say that's advice. That's advice I wish I had and didn't follow. I did not have a long-term arc planned for Van. I'm getting a little better at that by looking at least a couple of books out at this point.
Well, that's great that the rest of us can learn from your experience. Sorry about that. Hey, Julie, what are you talking about today?
Well, I'm talking about all the things that are happening this year, and I've decided sort of to take a philosophical approach and call 2017 my what the hell year. And that relates directly to writing, which I'll talk about in a moment. But so far, this year, which I thought was going to be a fairly calm one, has been an unpredictable year of bumps and bruises, including writing rejections, family illnesses, my podcast partner's car accident, another dear friend's son's life-threatening illness, and that chaotic political scene. Oh, and by the way, a developer near me is pulling down my neighbor's modest ranch house and barn and putting up 28 mega mansions on teeny tiny lots. Yeah, and bulldozing a row of 90-year-old fir and cedar trees in my quiet little neighborhood because they're in the way. So I'm in a weird mood, as you can tell, and this doesn't help my writing. I decided as I continue on my rocky path to publication to enter a few writing competitions, because what the hell? As Gordie Howe once said, you miss 100% of the shots that you never take. And yes, indeed, I love hockey, which is odd considering I grew up on Southern California beaches, but there you go. So I'm entering a few competitions this year and have also requested the peer level critiques that can be obtained by contestants. I've done this before. I was a finalist last year for Mystery for PNWA, and the feedback I got was professional, constructive, and very helpful. And if you have the chance, if you feel like you're ready to submit to a competition, I highly recommend that you ask for the professional or peer-related feedback when you're ready. And I'm also giving back by serving as a judge and a critique person for another national fiction competition. So I'll let you know how I've done at the end of the summer when most of these writing conferences and the judging process is over. And that brings up my main point about writing, especially thrillers, which Wendy's touched on when talking about Past Crimes, Glen's first book. The writer must show that the protagonist, like Van, is likable, relatable, and even vulnerable. Because really, who wants to read about the investigator, the agent, or the soldier or spy who's perfect and has no conflicts? That's boring. The writer must show the protagonist striving, aiming for something they need, suffering, and failing. Showing the main character's pain, remorse, regret, or even literal torture, as in the book The Target by David Baldacci, makes the reader feel compassion, the first step in getting the reader invested in your book. As a writer, you have to build that emotional link between reader and character, or the pages will stop turning. And as a writer, you must make the protagonist or hero go through something early on, and you have to take the reader along with you, or you won't have much of a book. They'll put that book down, in fact. So take a look at the next mystery or thriller you read, and chances are you'll see some kind of before context. It may be a flashback. You might call it the old normal, which involves loss, betrayal, or guilt, before your hero or heroine transitions to the new normal, which chances are may be just as difficult or worse. The writer isn't merely trying to torture the hero or heroine for fun. It's a very necessary part of both the story and gaining reader engagement. And as for me and my WTH endeavors for 2017, keep your fingers crossed.
I got all my fingers crossed for you, Julie.
Thank you.
Me too.
Well, today I wanted to talk about when I read in first person, I am scareder. Have you ever been in a full elevator when the doors close and then nothing happens? It's an unnaturally long pause and the elevator isn't moving. Maybe 20 seconds after the doors close. I'm still standing in this crowded elevator that acts stuck. A couple of people are chatting. The rest of us are standing, staring at the closed doors. In my mind, I'm silently telling myself, it's fine. It'll start in a moment. Or if not, then the doors will open. Suddenly, one of the gals standing in the middle startles with an outburst. We're not moving. I'm getting really scared. We should be moving. Instantly, my nerves leap from DEFCON 5 to DEFCON 2. By the way, that's the lowest alarm to the alarm that says deploy within 15 minutes. Now I'm seeing the situation through her perspective, and I'm letting her fears be mine. That's what first-person point of view does for me as a reader. I not only experience the story myself, but I'm completely influenced by the character moving through the story. If they're afraid of a person, then I am. If they don't like the look of the apartment building, then I don't either, and I'm on my guard. I always want to see more, know more, but I have to trust this character because that's the only knowledge of the situation that I'm going to get. I hear this character's thoughts, so I learn his strengths and weaknesses, but I can't guard against them or control them, and so that just heightens my tension. This can really be a great way to write. and it's a great way for the writer to lay out the story with the reader's involvement. It's a great way for the reader to feel the pain vicariously that the writer is putting his character through. There's a pivotal chapter in Past Crimes that is just one example of Glen's skill at this point of view. In this chapter, Van took me down a dark alley, desperate for getting what he had come for. Van's thoughts were palpable in me as we had to get past the bad guys, get what we'd come for, scared for our lives every minute as we approached. He's looking for some kind of weapon. So I find myself trying to find something, trying to think of a way to live through this. No one to help, scared of so many things we saw and so many things we couldn't see but did imagine. That chapter and other examples of Glen's writing sticks with me. He brought the situation to life for me and also brought the character to life for me. I know that character. I know his thoughts. There's no narrator that's showing me or telling me about Van. I know him for myself. First person isn't always the best choice for a story, but choosing the best point of view for telling your story can make or break it. And I'm going to go on and give you a book recommendation for this episode. And I'm recommending an author that Glen actually mentioned, Robert B. Parker and his Jesse Stone saga books. This is a remarkable, untypical cozy mystery series. In the cozy mystery world, our cozy sleuths are usually not desperately conflicted, and although they certainly have their obstacles and torments, they can still make it to their bakery or their tea shop for work on time. In the Jesse Stone series, that stretches this mold. Even before he has to confront the torments and painful experiences that are innate as a police chief, he has his own demons. He started out as a minor league baseball player with a lot of promise until a game's over, devastating shoulder injury. Later, he loses his job as a homicide detective in LA when his wife divorces him and he becomes an alcoholic. So he goes to a small town in Massachusetts to interview for a chief of police job and shows up to the interview drunk. But he gets the job because the corrupt council thinks they can easily control him. But Jesse Stone is going to fight against that too. And the author finds plenty more challenges to hurl towards Jesse. The self-inflicted challenges and hurdles gives his cozy mystery puzzle solving an added depth and interest for the reader. And it's the understanding or history of some of his shortcomings that contribute to his analysis of the mysteries in front of him. Talk about pulling in a reader's interest. And there's an extra treat as well, because the author, Robert B. Parker, was an absolute artist at writing gritty and realistic dialogue. The way he writes the conversations, it's unique to each character, so that also treats the reader into insights about each of them. The Hallmark Channel's mystery movies of this series are excellent with Tom Selleck, but I definitely recommend the books too. Glen, what recommendation do you have for our listeners?
Sure. By the way, I'm a big fan of the Jesse Stone series as well. Although Spencer is probably always closest to my heart. I've read a lot of the Jesse Stones, and I've seen a lot of those movies with Tom Selleck. And they're different takes on the same character, but I like them both quite a bit. Yes. So great recommendation. So my recommendation, and I'm going to caveat this a little bit by saying that since I've read the book, the author has become a friend of mine and a friend of our families along the way. But that should in no way take away from my recommendation for what is an excellent thriller and really a superb writer. And that's the author's name is Jamie Mason. She's a friend of ours who she lives and writes out of North Carolina. And she's written 2 books so far. She had an acclaimed debut novel It was called Ripping Good by the New York Times, called Three Graves Full, about a man who is, and this is not the book I'm recommending, but it deserves a mention anyway, about a man who goes to bury a body in his backyard only to find there are other bodies already there.
Whoa. Oh, my God.
So there's a good hook for you. Yeah. So, but the book I'm going to recommend is her second book, and that's called Monday's Lie. And it's about a woman named Dee Aldrich, and she and her brother were raised by their mother. And their mother was and is during much of the book a covert operative for the government. She is a field agent for the CIA, or what we assume is the CIA. So she is a spy, and is an expert one at that. And so Dee and her brother had a very unusual upbringing, as you might imagine. Her mom would play spy games with the two of them, where she would give them rewards for being able to memorize things, being able to spot things on the street, understanding when and how people are lying. So she grew up with, to quote the Taken movies, a unique set of skills. Dee, although tempted perhaps by the same path, chose a more conventional upbringing and married and has a career, and her husband has a career and has been married for some time. And the events of the book start when Dee comes to realize that she may have inherited a large amount of money from her mother, but her husband seems to know a lot more about it than she does. And this gets us into what I would consider a domestic thriller with a twist, which is it's a domestic thriller when at least one of the characters has skills that you wouldn't find in your normal housewife.
Ah, yeah.
So Monday's Lie is just a beautifully written book. It's very evocative. The language is lovely, and it's by Jamie Mason. I highly recommend it. It's a great read.
Oh, it sounds good.
Very good. And I'm reading, or actually recommending, a British police procedural by an author by the name of Morag Joss. The last name's Joss, a writer from Scotland. And I feel certain that her first name is pronounced Mora, even though it's spelled Morag, but I'm not really sure. And the novel is the first in a trilogy. It's called Funeral Music, and all the action happens in the historic town of Bath, England, which was settled way back by the ancient Romans. Our protagonist is Sarah Selkirk, who is a world-class cellist who suffered an emotional breakdown a year back in the midst of a performance on stage in Paris. And she struggles with unresolved grief and guilt over the death of her lover, although she was not at fault. So she's taking a well-deserved break from the high pressure of performing on the international stage and realizes there are a lot of things missing from her glamorous life, especially human connection. Having some time off gives her time to reflect and also to look into a case of murder in her small community. She's scheduled to perform in a very small concert at a local museum, her first entree back into performing in public, something she's been highly phobic about, when the museum director is brutally murdered and found in the famous Roman baths adjoining the museum. As you might anticipate, there are a host of suspects and also an attractive music-loving detective chief inspector, one who's talked her into giving him cello lessons, and he's not a novice musician. She uncovers a string of people who hated the victim, and we hate the victim right along with them as we learn more about him in this book, along with many secrets and evidence of damaged lives, much of it driven by greed. The killer is much closer than Sarah realizes, and this plot is as complex as a Bach fugue, winding and curling in upon itself. You'll enjoy the sense of place, the psychological insights, the intriguing characters, and especially the musical background. This is part of a trilogy, and I'm only sorry that there are only the 3 books with Sarah as the inquisitive sleuth. Morag Joss is the winner of the CWA Silver Dagger Award and has some other more recent books out as well. I know you'll enjoy this mystery series, which I found both witty and touching. And I think that's a wrap up for today, Wendy. We've talked about some wild rides, emotional issues like remorse and betrayal and how they feature in thrillers, the challenges of writing, and Glen's new book, Every Day Above Ground, which is coming out in July.
Yay.
And we thank Glen Erik Hamilton, best-selling thriller writer, for joining us today on Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries.
Thank you.
We're very, very grateful
Thanks
for
very
your
much,
time,
Wendy.
Glen.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks very much.
Good. And our next April podcast will feature one of Wendy's all-time favorite cozy authors, Laura Childs, a master of the cozy mystery. She's going to try not to go all fangirl on us here. And apparently,
Go ahead.
Laura
Go ahead.
Oh, come on, is now writing thrillers, more domestic thrillers. But thank you again, Glen, and thank you, listeners. Keep reading and keep writing.